I never imagined the place I called home would be taken from me by my own family, and my name is Emma. I'm a single mother raising my 7-year-old son, Leo. 3 years ago, after my divorce, I worked 2 jobs just to afford a small apartment in the city. It wasn't big. The kitchen was tiny, the paint on the walls was peeling, and the elevator worked only when it felt like it. But to me, it was everything. Every month, I paid the rent on time. Every night after work, I helped Leo with his homework at our little kitchen table. I told him, "This place is ours. No matter what happens, we always have a home." My mother never liked that apartment. "You should let your sister live there," she said one evening on the phone. "She needs a fresh start." My sister, Rachel, had always been the favorite. Growing up, she got the new clothes, the better birthday gifts, the attention. I got lectures about responsibility. "Mom," I told her calmly, "I pay for that apartment. I worked hard for it." She sighed like I had disappointed her again. Family should help family, but helping Rachel usually meant sacrificing something of mine. So I ignored the comments and kept living my life until last Tuesday. I came home from work late. Leo was holding my hand, half asleep after his after-school program. When we reached the apartment building, something felt wrong. The hallway lights were on. And when I put my key in the door, it didn't work. I tried again, nothing. Then the door suddenly opened from the inside, and standing there in my living room was my sister Rachel, holding my spare key. Behind her, I saw my mother sitting on my couch like she owned the place. Rachel smiled and said something that made my stomach drop. "Emma, Mom said this apartment belongs to me now." And that was the moment I realized something very illegal had just happened, and I still had the lease papers in my bag. I slowly stepped back into the hallway, because the next thing I decided to do would shock both of them. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. Leo squeezed my hand and whispered, "Mom, why is Aunt Rachel in our house?" Our house. Hearing that word from my son made something tighten inside my chest. Rachel leaned against the doorframe like she belonged there. My mother sat calmly on the couch, sipping tea from my mug. "Emma, don't make this dramatic," Mom said. "Rachel needed a place, and you're hardly ever home anyway." "So you changed my lock?" Rachel shrugged. "The landlord already knows." Mom talked to him. That didn't make sense. I had signed the lease myself. My name, my payments, my apartment. "Where are our things?" I asked quietly. Rachel waved toward the hallway. "Some are in boxes. The rest, well, we had to make space." "Make space? For them?" Leo looked up at me again, confused and scared. I knelt beside him and forced a calm smile. "It's okay," I told him softly. "We're just going to take a little walk." Behind me, my mother scoffed. "Emma, stop acting like a victim. You should be happy your sister finally has stability." I slowly stood up. Inside my bag, I felt the thick envelope that held every rent receipt and the signed lease agreement. 3 years of proof. Rachel crossed her arms. "You can come back tomorrow and pick up the rest of your stuff." I didn't argue. Instead, I gently took Leo's hand and walked down the hallway. Behind us, Rachel slammed the door. The moment we stepped outside the building, Leo looked up at me. "Mom, where are we going?" I pulled my phone out of my pocket and looked at the police station address I had just searched. Because if my own family thought they could steal my home, they were about to learn exactly what happens when you mess with a single mother who keeps every document. And I had a feeling the officer at the front desk was going to be very interested in what I was about to show him. The police station was only 10 minutes away, but that night it felt much longer. Leo sat quietly beside me on the bench in the waiting area, holding his little backpack. His eyes kept moving between me and the officers walking around the room. "Mom, are we in trouble?" he asked softly. I shook my head and kissed his hair.
"No, sweetheart."
We didn't do anything wrong. But inside, my heart was racing. After a few minutes, a middle-aged officer called us to his desk. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" I took a slow breath and placed the thick envelope on the table. "My family just took my apartment," I said. The officer raised an eyebrow. "They changed the locks and moved my things out while I was at work." He looked skeptical at first. Situations like this probably sounded like family arguments all the time. But then I opened the envelope. One by one, I placed the documents on his desk. The signed lease agreement, the rent payment receipts, the utility bills with my name and address. The officer leaned forward, reading carefully. His expression slowly changed. "You've lived there 3 years?" he asked. "Yes." "And your sister claims it's hers now?" I nodded. "Did you give her permission to move in?"
No.
He sat back in his chair and rubbed his chin. "Well, if the locks were changed without your consent and your property was removed, that could be a legal eviction and property interference." Leo looked up at me hopefully. The officer picked up the phone on his desk. "I think we need to call someone," he said. But before he dialed, he paused and asked one more question. "Ma'am, do you happen to know how your mother convinced the landlord to let this happen? Because if the landlord approved it, then something in this paperwork doesn't add up." The officer's question made my stomach twist. "I don't know," I admitted. My landlord, Mr. Harris, had always been strict about paperwork. Every year he reminded tenants, nothing changes unless it's written and signed. So, how could my sister suddenly be living in my apartment? The officer picked up one of the receipts again. "Your payments look consistent. No missed months." "Never," I said quickly. "I work 2 jobs. I always pay on time." He nodded slowly. Then he reached for the phone and dialed a number. "Let's confirm something." Leo sat beside me, swinging his legs nervously while the phone rang. After a few seconds, someone answered. "Hello, Mr. Harris? This is Officer Daniels from the City Police Department. I'm calling regarding the apartment on Maple Street." My heart started pounding. The officer listened quietly for a moment, then his eyebrows pulled together. "I see," he said slowly. Another pause. Then he looked directly at me. "You approved a tenant change this afternoon?" My breath caught in my throat. "Approved?" The officer put the call on speaker. A tired voice came through the phone.
Yes.
The mother came with documents. She said her daughter Emma was moving out and transferring the lease to Rachel. My hands started shaking. "That's not true," I said loudly. The officer raised a hand, signaling me to wait. "Mr. Harris," he continued calmly, "did Emma sign the transfer form herself?" There was a short silence on the phone. Then the landlord said something that made the room suddenly feel very cold. "Well, the signature looked like hers." The officer slowly turned the document toward me. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "does this look like your signature?" I leaned forward to see the paper, and the moment my eyes landed on the name written at the bottom, my heart dropped, because someone had signed Emma Carter. But it wasn't me. For a second, I just stared at the paper. My name was written clearly at the bottom, Emma Carter. But the signature wasn't mine. The officer watched my face carefully. "Is that your handwriting?" I shook my head immediately.
No.
"I never signed that." Leo looked between us, confused, but I forced myself to stay calm. The officer picked up the document and studied it again. "Mr. Harris," he said into the phone, "who brought this form to you?" "My tenant's mother," the landlord replied. "And another woman. I assumed it was the sister." "Rachel, of course." "And you didn't ask for identification?" the officer asked. "Well, the mother seemed very confident. She said Emma was at work and asked her to deliver the paperwork." My hands clenched into fists. The officer thanked him and ended the call. For a moment, the room was silent except for Leo's backpack zipper slowly moving in his hands. Then Officer Daniels looked at me again. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "if that signature isn't yours, then this document may be forged." The word hit me like a stone.
Forgery.
That meant what my mother and sister did wasn't just unfair. It was a crime. The officer gathered the papers into a neat stack. "I'll need to make a report," he said. "And we may need to visit the apartment tonight." Leo's eyes widened. "We're going back home?" I looked down at him and squeezed his hand. "Yes," I said quietly, because now this wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was police business. Officer Daniels stood up, grabbed his keys, and nodded toward the door. "Let's go talk to your sister." But as we walked out of the station, I had no idea that when we reached the apartment, someone else would already be waiting inside. The drive back to my apartment felt strangely quiet. Officer Daniels sat in the front seat of the patrol car, focused on the road. Leo and I were in the back. My son held my hand the entire way, like he was afraid I might disappear. Streetlights passed by the window one after another. When we finally turned onto Maple Street, my heart started beating faster. The apartment building looked the same as always, but something felt different. As we walked toward the entrance, Officer Daniels slowed down. "Stay close to me," he said. I nodded. The hallway lights were still on. The same door stood at the end of the corridor, my door. But now voices were coming from inside. Loud voices. Rachel's voice. And my mother's. Officer Daniels knocked firmly. "Police department. Open the door." For a moment, everything inside went silent. Then we heard quick footsteps. The door opened halfway, and Rachel appeared. The confident smile she had earlier vanished the second she saw the officer. "Rachel Carter?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "We need to talk about the lease transfer for this apartment." Behind her, my mother stood up from the couch. When she saw me standing there with Leo, her face turned pale. "Emma, why did you bring the police?" she snapped. Before I could answer, Officer Daniels stepped forward. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe a forged signature was used today." Rachel's eyes widened. My mother immediately shook her head. "That's ridiculous." But the officer held up the document. "Then maybe you can explain something." Rachel looked from the paper to me and then to our mother. And suddenly, she said something that made the entire room go silent. "Wait, Mom told me Emma already agreed to give me the apartment." All eyes slowly turned to my mother, because in that moment, it became very clear that someone in this room was lying. The room fell completely silent. Rachel looked confused, shifting her eyes between me and our mother. "Mom, you said Emma signed the papers," she said slowly. My mother crossed her arms. "Of course she did. She's just changing her story now." Officer Daniels didn't react. He simply placed the lease transfer form on the small coffee table. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "forgery is a serious offense. I suggest you think carefully before answering." My mother scoffed. "This is ridiculous. I was just helping my other daughter." "Helping?" I finally spoke, my voice shaking. "You packed my things into boxes and changed the locks while my son and I were at work." Leo squeezed my hand again. Rachel looked around the apartment, suddenly unsure. Half of my belongings were stacked in the hallway. My son's toys were shoved into a plastic bin. "Mom, you said Emma was moving out," Rachel whispered. "I said she didn't need this place anymore," Mom replied quickly. Officer Daniels pointed to the signature on the paper. "Who signed Emma's name?" My mother's eyes flicked to the document for just a second. That small moment told the officer everything. But before he could say another word, there was a knock on the apartment door. 3 sharp knocks. Everyone turned. Rachel slowly opened it. Standing in the hallway was Mr. Harris, the landlord. He looked nervous as he stepped inside. "I came as soon as the officer called," he said. Then he pulled another paper from his folder. "There's something else you all need to see." When he placed the second document on the table, my heart stopped, because this time, the signature actually did look like mine. For a moment, no one spoke. I stared at the paper on the table. My name was written clearly at the bottom again, Emma Carter. But this time, the signature looked almost exactly like mine. My stomach dropped. That's impossible," I whispered. Officer Daniels slid the document closer to me. "Take a good look." My hands trembled as I picked it up. The letters curved the same way I usually wrote them. Even the small loop in the C looked familiar. Rachel leaned over the table.
"See?
"I told you Mom said Emma signed it." I shook my head quickly.
No.
"I never signed this." Leo looked up at me, confused. "Mom," Mr. Harris cleared his throat nervously. "This is the copy your mother brought earlier today. It's the official lease transfer request." Officer Daniels frowned. "And you're certain this is the same document?" "Yes," the landlord said. "But there's something strange." Everyone looked at him. He pointed to the top corner of the paper. "That form was printed this morning from my office computer." The officer's eyes narrowed. meaning the signature had to be written today. A cold silence filled the room, because today, I had been at work all day, nowhere near the landlord's office. Officer Daniels turned to my mother again. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "were you at Mr. Harris's office this afternoon?" My mother hesitated, just for a second, but Rachel noticed it too. "Mom," she asked. Before my mother could answer, Mr. Harris spoke again. "There's another thing," he said. He reached into his folder and pulled out a small printed photo. A security camera outside my office recorded the person who signed this document. My heart began pounding. The officer took the photo and placed it on the table. Everyone leaned forward to look. And the moment I saw the face in that picture, my breath caught in my throat, because the woman holding the pen looked exactly like me. For a second, the room felt like it was spinning. The woman in the security photo had my hair, my face, even the same jacket I often wore to work. Rachel's eyes went wide. "Emma, that's you." "No," I said immediately, my voice shaking. "I was at work all day." Officer Daniels studied the photo carefully. "Mr. Harris, what time was this taken?" The landlord checked the small timestamp printed at the bottom. 2:17 p.m. My heart started pounding even faster. At 2:17 p.m., I had been at the grocery store where I worked, standing at register 4 during the afternoon rush. "Officer, I have a time card," I said quickly. "My manager can confirm I was working." Rachel looked back at the photo again, confused now. "But she really does look like you." My mother suddenly spoke up. "Maybe Emma forgot," she said with a tight smile. "People sign things all the time and don't remember."
Ist certa her.
"Mom, stop." Officer Daniels lifted the photo closer to the light. "Something about this doesn't feel right," he muttered. Then Leo, who had been quietly standing beside me, tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart." He pointed at the photo on the table. "Why is that lady wearing your work name tag?" Everyone froze. My eyes snapped back to the picture. And Leo was right. Clipped to the woman's jacket was the small rectangular tag I wore every day at the store. "Emma, customer assistant." But I slowly shook my head. "That's not possible," I said, because earlier that afternoon, my name tag had gone missing. Officer Daniels lowered the photo and looked around the room. "All right," he said quietly. "Now we're not just talking about forgery anymore." He turned toward my mother. "Ma'am, do you know anyone who looks almost exactly like your daughter? Because whoever signed that paper clearly wanted the landlord to believe it was Emma." My mother didn't answer right away. She just stared at the photo on the table, her lips pressed tightly together. Rachel looked between us nervously. "Mom, what is he talking about?" Officer Daniels repeated the question. "Do you know someone who could pretend to be Emma?" The silence in the room grew heavy. Then my mother suddenly let out a short laugh. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Why would anyone pretend to be her?" I crossed my arms. "Maybe you should answer the question." For the first time that night, my mother looked slightly uneasy. Officer Daniels noticed it too. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "security footage shows someone wearing Emma's name tag and signing a legal document. If that person isn't Emma, then someone helped arrange it." Rachel slowly turned toward our mother. "Mom, did you bring someone with you to the landlord's office?" My mother shook her head quickly. "Of course not." But Mr. Harris spoke up again. "Well, actually, you weren't alone." Everyone looked at him. "You arrived with another woman," the landlord said slowly. "I assumed she was Emma because she kept her head down and didn't talk much." My heart skipped a beat. Rachel's voice came out in a whisper. "Then who is she?" The officer turned back to the landlord. "Did you see her face clearly?" "Not completely," Mr. Harris admitted. "She was wearing sunglasses and a mask when she walked in." Rachel frowned. "That's weird." But my mother suddenly stepped forward. "That doesn't prove anything," she snapped. "Anyone could wear a mask." Officer Daniels calmly picked up the security photo again. "Yes," he said. "Anyone could." Then he flipped the photo over and showed us something printed on the back. Except the building camera didn't just capture the face. My breath caught. "There's also footage of the car she arrived in." The officer looked directly at my mother. And according to the license plate, his voice slowed. That car is registered to someone in this family. The room went completely still. Rachel looked at the officer. Someone in this family? Officer Daniels nodded slowly and placed the printed image of the car on the table beside the photo. My eyes moved to the license plate. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. Then my stomach dropped, because I recognized the number. Rachel leaned closer first. Wait, that's... She stopped mid-sentence. Her face turned pale. That's my car, she whispered. Everyone turned toward her.
What? I said.
Rachel shook her head quickly. No, that can't be right. I didn't go anywhere today. My car was parked outside Mom's house all afternoon. Officer Daniels looked calm, but his eyes were sharp. Are you sure about that? Yes, Rachel said. I gave Mom the spare key last week, but I didn't drive it today. Slowly, every pair of eyes in the room turned toward our mother. She didn't move. Mom, Rachel asked quietly. My mother's jaw tightened. So, what if I borrowed your car? The officer folded his arms. Borrowing the car isn't the issue. He tapped the photo of the woman who looked like me. The issue is who was driving it. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time that night, she looked cornered. Rachel stared at her. Mom, who is that woman? My heart was pounding so loudly, I could hear it in my ears. Officer Daniels spoke again. Ma'am, if you arranged for someone to impersonate your daughter and sign legal documents, that's a criminal offense. My mother suddenly snapped. I didn't impersonate anyone. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The officer's eyebrows lifted slightly. Rachel's voice shook. Then who did? My mother looked toward the door, then back at us. And finally, she muttered something that made the entire room freeze. I just asked her to help. I stepped forward. Her who? My mother slowly lifted her eyes to mine and said a name I hadn't heard in 10 years. My mother looked straight at me and quietly said, Lena. The name hit me like a sudden shock. Rachel blinked in confusion. Lena? Who's Lena? But I knew exactly who she meant. Lena was my cousin. When we were younger, everyone used to joke that we looked like twins. Same face shape, same hair, even the same smile. We hadn't spoken in almost 10 years. Mom, you called Lena? I asked slowly. My mother crossed her arms again, trying to look confident. She just helped sign a paper. It's not a big deal. Officer Daniels shook his head. It is a big deal. That's identity fraud and document forgery. Rachel stepped back, staring at our mother like she didn't recognize her anymore. You told me Emma agreed to give me the apartment, she said quietly. My mother's voice rose. I was trying to help you. Emma has a job. She can find another place. Leo tightened his grip on my hand. For a moment I said nothing. I just looked around the apartment I had worked 3 years to afford. Then I looked back at the officer. I want to file a full report, I said calmly. Officer Daniels nodded. We'll start the investigation tonight. My mother's face went pale. Rachel slowly sat down on the couch, realizing what had just happened. And as the officer began writing everything down, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not sadness, relief. Because the truth had finally come out. Sometimes the people who betray you the most are the ones who expect you to stay silent. But that night I learned something important. When someone tries to take what you built with honesty, the truth is the strongest thing you can fight back with.